Okay. So God is speaking, if you haven't noticed. Can we can go ahead and put up that picture? The Statue of Liberty? It's a video? Okay, we'll do it. You got to do flip-flop? Okay, so we'll do that later. So I grew up in New York, and unfortunately I never went to go visit the Statue of Liberty. Lived there my whole life. Tourists come from all over the world to visit the Statue of Liberty. I grew up there. It was in my backyard practically, and I never went to go there. But in all those years, I never saw a story where lightning hit the Statue of Liberty. Never. So this thing is sitting out there in the middle of the water on its own little island. And you know what it's made of? It's made of copper. It's copper. What's one of the best conductors of electricity? It's copper. So whose bright idea was it? I think it came from France. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anymore. It came from France, okay? Not too bright. But you put this thing out in the middle of the ocean, made out of copper, and she's got her arms stuck up. It's as bad as, what was it, Benjamin Franklin? When he flew the kite and he put the key on there, and they said he discovered. I was like, what are you thinking, dude? You got electrocuted. It's the same thing. I'm going to put this copper statue out in the middle of the ocean with its hands sticking up. I mean, what else is there that could say, lightning strike me? It never happened before. Never. God is speaking. What is he saying? I'm not too sure. But he's speaking pretty loud. And it's our time to pay attention. I'm going to do some rehearsing. Re-rehearsing? Is that a word? I'm going to do some rehearsing of some things today that some of you have heard over the last couple of weeks. But sometimes it bears repeating. And I say that because in the Bible, if you ever notice, and there's nothing in the Bible that's said by accident, but if you notice in the Bible, there are some stories that you only see Jesus say once in one of the Gospels, right? It's in one place and it's nowhere else. There are other stories that may be in two Gospels. Other stories are repeated multiple times. And so you got to ask yourself, is that by accident? Just all four writers of the gospel decided, well, I'm going to make sure I get this story in. It's not by accident. When God repeats a story, repeats something, it's for a reason. And when he says things over and over and over again, those of you who've had kids or experience with kids, and I know Junior over there you'll never have to do this with him. Like say things 2 or 3 or 4 times. But a parent will have to say something multiple times and typically raise their voice each time if the message is not getting across. And God's no different with us. If he starts repeating something over and over, it's time for us to listen up. Listen, pay attention. So a couple of weeks ago, we started going through the story of Jonah and how Jonah went to Nineveh to preach. But first he had to spend a little time inside a fish. That's a pretty famous story, right? God says to Jonah, go to Nineveh. He says, nope, not interested, takes a different route, ends up in a fish, and then that time in the fish, he has an attitude adjustment, a serious attitude adjustment, to the point where he says, okay, I'll go. But there's some other details of that story that we went through. So the city of Nineveh was a extremely large city. It took 3 days to walk through the city. 3 days walking to get from one side of the city to the other. And there were about 120,000 people in the city. And you know the story. God says to Jonah, the city is extremely wicked, and I'm going to wipe them out. But I'm going to give them one last chance. But there are a few details that are historic, but are not necessarily mentioned in the Bible. Number one is a couple of years before Jonah got there, there was at least one plague, if not two, that wiped out a whole bunch of people. So first they get a plague. And now I'm sure you heard on the news and so on with this eclipse coming. But in Jonah's day, there was an eclipse, a solar eclipse, when he got to Nineveh. And there are a lot of parallels to what is going on in this country right now to that time. Now, I'm not here to tell you the world's going to end, okay? That's not, God didn't say that. But there's clearly something going on that I believe we need to pay attention to. Now, what was that verse in Exodus we were talking about this morning? Exodus 4:8. Okay, so in Exodus 4:8, April 8th, eclipse, Exodus 4:8. And what does Exodus 4:8 say? If they don't pay attention to the first sign, I'm going to give them a second sign. So God is speaking, and we need to listen. I'm not, Basically, he says in Exodus 4:8, if you don't pay attention to the first time I talk, I'm going to say something else to pay attention to. Yeah, the second sign. See, Jonah gets to a city where things are just out of control. They're just totally out of control. And you'd have to be not paying attention to anything to not see that right now things are out of control. Totally out of control. Life, the world. I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. Now, Jonah shows up, got a city of 120,000, and everybody falls on their face and repents for the things that they've been doing wrong. I mean, everybody, even the animals are repenting. I mean, that's crazy. Is that just because Jonah was so impressive in his presentation? See, back then, if you got an eclipse and the sun is darkened, they were not really super scientific people back then. They knew, hey, when I can't see the sun anymore and it's dark in the middle of the day, whether they believed in Jehovah as the God of Israel or just their own gods, because a lot of times the sun was their god. And when they saw a solar eclipse, man, it's like, hey, what is going on? Something is going down. It got their attention. And when that coordinated, at the same time Jonah shows up in town, that's why they listened to him. He didn't have a reputation. Okay, they didn't know anything about this guy Jonah. But to them, the time that the guy walks into town and all of a sudden there's no sun, it's like, whoa, we need to pay attention to what this guy is saying. There's one other important day that there was a solar eclipse. And that's on the day that Jesus was crucified. See, there were a lot of things, a lot of signs going on that day. Because there was a Roman standing next to the cross, and that guy said, surely that was the Son of God. What made him say that? Well, it's dark and there's an earthquake the moment he dies. God puts signs in the heavens to get our attention. That guy didn't just like, he was the Son of God. Well, actually there was an eclipse as the sun was coming up that day. See, scientists have been able to pinpoint the exact day that Jesus died. Because however they do it, the people who are into astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy, they can pinpoint with computers exactly dates that there were solar eclipses. And so they know the exact date that there was a solar eclipse over Jerusalem. And so they can pinpoint the exact day that he died. That's just a sidebar. God is letting his people know that he's up to something. Not the end of the world. I don't believe that. Because God is extremely, amen, brother. God is extremely, extremely patient with us. Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. God works through little kids. Believe it. Believe it. What did God say before he brought destruction on Sodom and Gomorrah? He spoke to Abraham, and he said, "Shall I hide from Abraham, my friend and my servant, what I'm about to do?" See, if you're a believer, God doesn't always do things in a bubble by himself and not share with you what he's about to do. He includes his children in what he's about to do. And he did that with Abraham. He says, I'm about to, and what did Abraham do? He did what every good Jewish businessman did. He negotiated a deal. Right? He says, God, if you're going to and he starts with, well, if there's some righteous people there, you're going to destroy the city? Well, and he negotiated and worked his way down to try and intercede for a city that was out of control. Same thing, city that's out of control. Unfortunately, the end of Sodom and Gomorrah was the end. But the righteous person he saved out. Lot and his family. He saved them out. Yeah, people will go to the other extreme. They see these signs and then they start to freak out. But there's no reason to freak out. If there's something coming, if you belong to him, you don't have to worry. He will protect, If he's the father that he says he is, okay, he's going to protect his kids from whatever is coming. A few years ago, I'm going to say 3-4 years ago, I had a dream, and I was standing in a building in New York City, very, very high up, and I was looking down Broadway. And as I'm looking, and I was standing there, I'm like, you know how dreams can be really weird sometimes. And I'm looking down this the Broadway, which is the big main drag down Manhattan, and I'm wondering, why am I here? And why am I looking down this road? And just as I'm thinking that, I see an explosion, and cars and people and everything just flying in the air. I'm like, wow. And as I continue to look at the debris from that explosion, there's a second explosion closer to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's two of them. And then a few seconds later, a minute later, whatever, there's a third explosion, and each one is getting closer and closer to me. And the third one was like really close up. Same thing, everything just blows up. I was in New York shortly after 9/11. And I know it seems like I'm bouncing around, but that's typical. And after 9/11, there was a tremendous revival in New York City. Give me a few minutes, I'll pull all of this stuff, all these loose ends will come together. There's a tremendous revival. Right close to where the Twin Towers were is a very, very old, 150-year-old church. Right in the shadows of Twin Towers. And everything around it was destroyed except for that church. Everything else was melted. And I can remember it was like December. I was there like just before Christmas. And I remember walking down. It was still smoldering. And there's still debris all in the street. And I remember there was, every time they brought out remains, everybody would just, there'd be an ambulance. There was like this ramp going all the way down because it was such a deep hole. And whenever they were bringing remains out, people would just stand to the side and let the ambulance pass by. It was very somber. I mean, just an indescribably somber feeling. My brother-in-law at the time was one of the first responders there when the towers went down. And he said the weirdest thing was to be looking at going through the rubble because there was no bodies. I mean, it's just pieces of bodies. And he says the weirdest thing was looking at like wristwatches, empty wristwatches, shoes with no feet in them. I mean, it was it affected him deeply. But anyway, there was a huge revival in New York at that time. But people have short memories. I pray for this kid, not only for full recovery, but I pray that he never forgets who healed him, because we have such short memories of miracles and things that God has done. Look through the Bible in the Old Testament. Israel had a short memory of times that they cried out to God, God answered, and then they forgot all about Jesus heals 10 lepers. How many come back to say thanks? 1. Wow. God help us to never forget the things that he's done. God help us to remember, to write down, to etch in our minds the things that he's done for us. Now, we're talking a little over 20 years since 9/11 and a big revival, big move of God in New York City. And you look at it now. You look at it now. What? Now here's the other parallel. Nineveh, they all repented, and God did not destroy him. Okay? I think Jonah wanted them to get a good whacking, but he didn't get his way because he was disappointed that God didn't do a number on Nineveh. But now, 40 years later, after this tremendous, tremendous revival in Nineveh, 40 years later, there's a king out of Nineveh, Sennacherib. It's a hard word to say. I always mess it up. And 40 years later, they're outside of Jerusalem with 185,000 soldiers looking to destroy them. Now here's a short rabbit trail. Today's full of rabbit trails. Here's a short rabbit trail. I asked Shelley to load last night the historic story of Nineveh, which was excavated over the last 100 years. And it backs up every single thing in the Bible from archaeology. The king's name, the king of Jerusalem's name, Hezekiah, and everything about that battle and everything about that story is backed up by historical fact. So when somebody says to you, oh, the Bible is this, the Bible is that, it's not true, whatever, this is one of those stories that is exactly the same from the writings of that city, which are in the British Museum, and the story, because they would put stories of battles on the walls of their palaces to brag, like bragging rights, and those stories, the reliefs, those carvings of the story of Nineveh are on the walls of the British Museum exactly as they are in the Bible, exactly, including Hezekiah's name, the king of Jerusalem, the Assyrian king's name. It's all right there. So in a brief period of 40 years, they've forgotten all about this tremendous revival. They've forgotten all about how Jonah came and preached. They've forgotten all about how they were saved from total destruction. And here they are, looking to wipe out God's people. Looking to wipe out, because Nineveh was not a godly city. It was a heathen city. And 40 years later, they're looking to wipe out God's people. Well, the end of the story is their army that they came to attack Jerusalem with, which by then was 185,000 soldiers, they all died in one night. In one night, wiped out. Because they forgot how they were saved. They forgot how they were delivered 40 years earlier. So where does that leave us? Well, the signs that we're looking at parallel Nineveh. Oh, besides the total solar eclipse, Nineveh had an earthquake. What just happened the other day? 4.8 earthquake in New Jersey. In New Jersey. We're not talking California on the San Andreas Fault. We're talking New Jersey. Statue of Liberty gets shocked, gets zapped. Here's an earthquake. When's the 8th? Tomorrow? Tomorrow's the 8th. It's going to be total. Okay. Oh, we had a plague a couple of years ago. We're paralleling exactly. So get this. You're living history. Okay, we can go back and read a whole bunch of stories and all the history and all that. You're in the middle of a historic story, whether you realize it or not. Yeah, a biblical kind of story. We're right in the middle of it. And it's the exact parallel of Nineveh. That's weird, man. That's weird. And I'm wondering, okay, well, if I read ahead of where we are right now, what the heck's going to happen? Hey, I'm not a end time prophet. I know how to read. Did you ever see this? I know this is kind of off track a little bit. You ever see a movie called The Never-Ending Story? Okay, story about a kid reading a book up in his attic, and as he's reading the book comes alive, and he realizes he's a character in the book. Okay, that's what this is like. We are characters in a story that's being written right now. I'm almost afraid to read ahead to see how this thing ends. You know what I mean? It's like, what? But I know this. God takes care of his kids. He always takes care of his kids. And I'm his kid. You're his kid. There's not anything to, like in the movies, generate any kind of fear over. Because if I put my trust in him, I know it's going to work out. I don't know how it's going to work out, but I know it's going to work out because I can trust him. But what he requires of us is to pay attention, to see these things happening and not say, oh, well, that's just a coincidence. I'm going to be 69 this year. I'm going to be 69 years old this year. I never saw the Statue of Liberty. Even though I never visited it, I never saw that thing get hit by lightning. And believe me, there was some, out there where the Hudson River comes down, the East River and all that. I mean, they get some really weird thunderstorms. That thing has never, ever, ever been hit. And certainly not a couple of days before a total solar eclipse. And an earthquake. And blah, 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 and on and on and on. If they don't pay attention to one sign, I'm going to give them another sign. The things that have been happening in New York on the legal front, I won't go too far down that road, never happened before. Never happened before. I'm not here to wave a Trump banner, okay? But never have those things been done to any person. Say what you will. I'm not here to make a political statement, okay? But the evil that's been done and the precedents that have been done should never have happened to any individual. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. One thing I learned about God, he'll put up with things for just so long. He's just like a parent. He's just like a parent. You got a disobedient kid. Hey, knock it off. They ignore you. Hey, I said knock it off. They still don't listen. Okay, I'm getting the belt. I'm done. Okay? I'm getting the stick. I'm done. Because you're going to listen to me one way or another. And that is what is happening right now. "9/11 was a warning. A lot of people died, right? It was a big, big warning. Things started to turn around. Okay, good. At least Nineveh went 40 years before they backslid. We've barely gone 20. Churches were thriving after 9/11. Thriving in Manhattan and New York. And that's New York, I'm just using it as an example. There's other places that fall into that category. I'm not just only picking on them. God has given us, as believers, a ringside seat to what he is doing. We've got a ringside seat because your eyes, and in this conversation, your eyes are open. People say, well, where's God? Where's God in all this? Where's God dead? Man, open your eyes. Look at. He is speaking. Speaking louder than I've ever heard. I've been a believer for 40-something years. He is speaking louder now than ever I have ever seen in my lifetime. And in some ways, it's kind of exciting. It's kind of exciting to be alive at this time and say, hey, we're living a Bible story right now. In 2024, we're living a Bible story. And I can't wait to see how the rest of the story unfolds. So I'll close with this. God said there would be signs in the heavens and in the earth. And we are getting signs in the heavens and in the earth. There were two sisters at a dinner party that Jesus was at, Mary and Martha. And one of them got upset because she was doing all the preparations and was not helping. And Jesus said, leave her alone, because she chose the better part. We all have stuff going on. You got work, family, kids, whatever. You always, a lot of competing distractions. But in this hour, don't miss the hour. In this hour, as much as possible, spend some mental time, spend some thought time observing and looking at what's going on. Because this generation is going to see God move like he hasn't moved. This is the greatest time ever. Since Jesus walked the earth, this is the greatest time ever. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. Keep your eyes and ears open, your spiritual eyes and ears. Look at these things that are going on. Pay attention. These are the kind of stories happening right now that you'll tell to your children's children, your grandchildren. It's an amazing, amazing time. I think you got the picture. Yeah. Yeah. The old lady's getting zapped.